Our next speaker is Nina Gatzoulis. She comes to us from the University of New Hampshire, where she is an adjunct professor of modern Greek studies and also is director of the modern Greek program at UNH. She's going to talk to us about the social and demographic consequences of the population exchange following the Treaty of Lausanne.
Thank you, Professor. I am retired now.
Congratulations.
But thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me here to speak with these fine academics. I became interested in the issue due to a personal account. My maternal grandfather was enlisted in the Greek army and was sent to Asia Minor during the Ottoman Greco War. He went there, left his young wife pregnant. He was a newlywed, never came back, and he never knew that he had a daughter. That's why I became so interested in the subject. John Freely, in his Children of Achilles, gives an excellent account of the Hellenic presence in Ionia, today's Turkey. Since the days of Troy, historic lands of Asia Minor have been home to Greeks. This Greek element fused and irrevocably entwined with the Turkish element as well as with other ethnic groups that existed in the area. It is the epic and ultimately tragic story of the Greek presence in Anatolia, beginning with the Trojan War and culminating in 1923 with the devastating population exchange that followed the Ottoman Greco War. The once magnificent cities that cluster along the Aegean and Mediterranean coast of Turkey are reminders of a civilization that produced the first Hellenic Enlightenment, giving birth to Homer, Herodotus, and other philosophers and writers. For 3 millennia, the Anatolian Greeks preserved their identity and culture as the tides of history washed over them, enduring conflicts that historians since Herodotus have seen as unending clash of civilizations between East and West. In the Balkans, the Ottoman rule ceased to exist, and in Anatolia, the decaying Ottoman Empire was continuing a policy that could be called the Turkification of Asia Minor. At the 1918 Paris Peace Conference, Venizelos lobbied hard for an expanded Hellas, including the large Greek communities in northern Imbros, Thrace, and Asia Minor, known as the Megali Idea, grand idea, meaning the Great Greek Expansion. In 1919, Greek troops were sent by the victorious Allies to the beautiful and multi-ethnic city of Smyrna in Asia Minor to protect, in quotation marks, Greek citizens, but in reality to serve as a buffer between the Italian army, which was advancing up the southern coast of Anatolia, and the British, who were already in Constantinople. After being encouraged by the European friends, the Greek army found itself isolated in central Anatolia. They were defeated by the forces of Kemal and forced to flee to the shores of the Aegean. In their wake, they brought with them thousands of Greek and other Christian citizens of the Ottoman Empire who feared that the advancing Ottoman army would massacre them. The Greeks were utterly defeated, calling this expedition as the Great Catastrophe. Raoul Blanchard, in The Exchange of Populations Between Greece and Turkey, states that during peace discussions following the Greco-Ottoman War, it was Turkey who demanded the expulsion of the Christians remaining in Turkey with the Muslims living in Greece. The exchange of the populations between Greece and Turkey was signed on January 30th, 1923 during the Lausanne Convention. It was a compulsory exchange that lasted quite a few years. The population exchange was to take effect on May 1st, 1923. However, by that time, most of the Orthodox Greeks living in the Ottoman Empire had already fled. According to Matthew Gibney and Randall Hansen, in their Immigration and Asylum, the exchange only involved the Greeks of Central Anatolia, Greek and Turkish speaking, and the Greeks of Pontus, who had not yet had the chance to flee, a total of roughly 189,916 individuals. There were more than 2,700,000 Greeks living in Anatolia in 1914. French teacher Ernest Hemingway, in an article in the Le Temps newspaper in 1918, wrote, "The Greeks of Asia Minor and Pontus number 2.5 million. However, there are further 600,000 Greeks who the Turks don't account for in their statistics because they speak Turkish and not Greek. Therefore, by the time the exchange of population was to officially take effect, 1 million Greeks had fallen victims to a genocide at the hands of the Ottoman irregulars. 500,000 had fled before the Greek army's defeat in the Greco-Ottoman War and the subsequent burning of Smyrna in September 1992, and the remainder fled in scenes of indescribable panic from the western shores of Asia Minor when the victorious Kemalist forces entered the city of Smyrna, burned it, and began massacring the Greek and Armenian populations. Thousands of Armenians also fled to Greece. George Horton, in his The Burning of Smyrna, wrote, "The destruction of Smyrna happened, however, in 1922, and no act ever perpetrated by the Turkish race in all its blood-stained history has been characterized by more brutal and lustful features, nor more productive of the worst forms of human suffering inflicted on the defenseless and unarmed. It was a fittingly lurid and satanic finale to the whole dreadful tragedy." According to David Gaunt, in his article regarding the Assyrians, one additional Christian ethnic group in Anatolia, in quotation marks, somewhere between 250,000 to 300,000 Assyrians were killed or died from starvation or disease in a series of campaigns orchestrated by the Ottoman Turkish government by 1915. In other words, the genocide was aimed in all of Anatolia's Christian population. Unfortunately, many authors use the total number of Greeks involved in the exchange and fail to stress that the majority actually fled and were in no way exchanged. The convention concerning the exchange of populations between Greece and Turkey was conducted with the purpose of saving the remaining Greeks from certain persecution or death at the hands of the Kemalist government, which no longer wanted Orthodox Greek Christians within the newly formed Turkish nation. The Greek population in Constantinople declined after Lausanne, despite their exemption status. There were 110,000 Greeks in Constantinople exempted from the exchange based on religion rather than ethnicity. Approximately 1,300,000 Orthodox Greeks of the Ottoman Empire relocated to Greece in exchange for roughly 355,635 Muslims living in Greece who went to Turkey. The International Mixed Commission established by Article 11 of the Lausanne Convention was responsible for the transfer. McCarthy suggests that about 66,000 Greeks fled to Europe and to USA. The Muslims of Western Thrace and the Greeks of Constantinople were exempt from the exchange. According to Oran, Turkification swept the nation and Turk became synonymous with Muslim. Through heavy taxation, various pogroms, and labor camps, Christians were forced to sell their assets and leave. Alexandris reports that between 1964 and 1967, 40,000 Greeks left Constantinople. By 1975, the number of Greeks in Constantinople had declined to under 10,000. Today, less than 2,500 remain in Constantinople, most of which are senior citizens. According to the Lausanne Treaty, Article 14, the islands of Imbros and Tenedos were to have their own administrative organization composed of local Greeks. This organization, however, never took place. In 1927, the entire population of both islands was exclusively Greek. In Imbros, there were 6,762 Greeks, and in smaller Tenedos, there were 1,631 Greeks. According to Alexandris, in the late 1960s and early 1970s, the Turkish government implemented a series of restrictions regarding education and cultural matters. Also, it implemented a program of expropriating the properties of the Greek islanders. As a result, many of the Greeks were forced to find refuge in Greece, Western Europe, the United States, and Australia. From 1923 to 1992, the Greek population in the two islands dropped from 9,000 to a mere 500 individuals. In 1922, the Greek government asked for help to organize the transfer of thousands of Greeks fleeing Turkey. With the approval of the League of Nations, Dr. Fridtjof Nansen, a Norwegian scientist, humanitarian, and Nobel Prize winner, was assigned this task. To assist with the refugee resettlement, a number of organizations were formed or were called upon for assistance. At the end of 1923, Henry Morgenthau became the chairman of the League of Nations and inspired the Greek Refugee Settlement Commission to assist resettlement. The International Committee of the Red Cross contributed with relief work for the refugee, both in Turkey and Greece. The Near East Relief also provided care for the refugees. According to Raoul Blanchard, in his exchange of populations between Greece and Turkey, the exchange was a humanitarian problem, especially for Greece, which was faced with an influx of over a million refugees, 2/3 of which were destitute of all resources. The land and homes of the Muslims who left Greece were used to house some of the refugees, but hundreds of thousands were still homeless. On the other hand, the Muslims who were transferred to Turkey found a large number of abandoned Greek homes to live in, so their repatriation was comparatively smoother. Now, refugees in Greece. Henry Morgenthau, in his book, I Was Sent to Athens, mentioned that the northern territories of Greece, Thrace, and Macedonia were the areas that most of the refugees were placed. In the two successive Balkan Wars, 1912 and 1913, the Ottoman Empire's defeats resulted in the loss of almost all of its European territory. The Balkan Wars from 1912 to 1913 was the true initial marker for the Christian Greeks' bleak future. Between these 2 years, 4 territories in the Balkans, Serbia, Bulgaria, Montenegro, and Greece, were liberated successfully from Ottoman rule. By the terms of the Treaty of Bucharest, signed August 10, 1913, Bulgaria lost a considerable amount of territory when Greece liberated most of Macedonia. This is the original, what you see on the projector there, the original English translation of the Treaty of Bucharest. Even though the Greeks from Asia Minor were relocated into another Greek land, the neighboring country, the Fyrom, next slide please. Next one, and next one. Okay, right there. The neighbor country of Fyrom, pursuing its own plans to gain access to the Aegean, focuses even today in the Pontian refugee who settled in Macedonia. As you see, these T-shirts were promoted recently by Skopje Diaspora in Melbourne, Australia, by Makos of Mayhem Clothing Company. Pondians out of Macedonia, Greeks out of Macedonia. Next one, please. Pondians, refugees, are not Macedonians. Can you go to forward, please? One more. One more. Okay. Consequently, the Carnegie Commission to the Balkans and its report is an international attempt of peace advocates to bring out the horrors of war in the year just before First World War. It is also significant as an early work to document war crimes and human rights abuse, including about of non-combatant citizens. In addition, the report does not refer to any Macedonian army or casualties of the Macedonian people. Can you go back to some of the statistics? Right there. The basis of the Ottoman censuses was the Milliyet system. People were assigned to ethnic categories according to religious affiliation. So all Sunni Muslims were categorized as Turks, all members of Greek Orthodox Church as Greeks, while the rest were of the Bulgarian Orthodox churches. The Ottomans were very good in keeping records. These are 4 censuses made by the Ottoman government in 1882, 1885, 1904, and 1906. Can you go one down? Down, right there. Thank you. In 1921, an official population census was composed in Yugoslavia. It comprises of 475 pages. The data irrefutably proves that the so-called Macedonian people did not exist. By the way, I have to mention that Macedonia was a geographic ancient region in ancient times and was part of the Greek realm. Today, it comprises Greece's northern territory. There is nowhere in the Treaty of Bucharest any references about Macedonia, as there aren't references in the census of the Ottoman Empire. During Ottoman rule, the Balkans were divided into three vilayets: the vilayet of Manastir, the vilayet of Salonik or Thessaloniki, and the vilayet of Kosovo. The vilayet of Kosovo, however, which included the city of Skopje, never was part of ancient Macedonia. The Ottoman government made no reference to Macedonia. McCarthy, in his Refugees, the work of the League, a 1926 report undertaken by the League of Nations, listed the number of refugees as follows. Greeks from Asia Minor, including the Pontos, a little over 1 million. Greeks from Eastern Thrace, 190,000. Greeks from Caucasus, 70,000. Greeks from Bulgaria, 30,000. Greeks from Constantinople, 70,000. Henry Morgenthau, in his book I Was Sent to Athens, refers that the Greek government was unable to deal with so many refugees, and an autonomous refugee settlement commission, RSC, was organized by the League of Nations to handle the refugee loans and undertake the settlement of the refugees in Greece. The RSC mainly undertook the settlement of the refugees in the countryside, although it helped a lot the refugees who remained in the big cities and especially in the areas of Athens and Piraeus. The Greek government had already set up a refugee fund, but it ceased operations when the RSC was founded. The commission built houses in Elefsina, Byron, Nea Ionia, Kessariani, and Kokinia, now suburban areas of the modern Athens Piraeus city complex. One of the successes of the RSC was that it managed to settle most of the refugees by 1926, mainly in Macedonia and Thrace. Kondoyorgi, in her population exchange, stresses the fact that the refugees who came to Greece in large numbers from different parts of Turkey with a varying professional and cultural background, spoke varying dialects of the Greek language, make them different than the native Greeks. Their misery upon arrival is well illustrated by the accounts of all sorts of witnesses, diplomats and journalists and politicians. Can you go to the last one, please? Go down, the last one. Down, 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 down. You're going up. Go down. Down. Okay, that's it right there. Thank you. Ernest Hemingway wrote on their exodus in October 1922, describing the long trail of refugees as compromising. 20, in quotation marks, 20 miles of carts drawn by cows, bullocks, and muddy-flanked water buffalo with exhausted, staggering men, women, and children, blankets over their heads, walking blindly along the rain beside their worldly goods. Kondoyorgi states that in 1912, the Greek population of Macedonia was recorded as being 42.6%. According to the author, with the expulsion of Turks and Slavs in 1926, it rose up to 88.8%. The region's general demographic growth was equally dramatic. Due to the wars and general instability, Macedonia had become sparsely populated, and the arrival of the refugees was generally beneficial, according to the author. Macedonia was an agricultural area. The land that the Turks and Slavs left behind was distributed to the newly arrived Asia Minor refugees. The legal regulation of the land reform, however, stated that only married couples could obtain land. The rate of marriage in Macedonia rose extremely fast during that time. Still, after the process of land distribution ended, the levels of marriages and fertility fell. Generally, compensation was not adequate to prevent widespread poverty. Pentsopoulos, in his The Balkan Exchange of Minorities and its Impact upon Greece, writes, "The refugees had few resources and little economic opportunity. Impoverished by years of warfare, Greece had a population of just about over 5 million at that time. The difficulty of absorbing an estimated 1,200,000 Anatolian Greeks while expelling 556,000 Turks overwhelmed the economic resources of the country. Malaria, typhoid, and dysentery were epidemics among the refugees. According to the League of Nations source, mortality rates among the new arrivals climbed at one point to 45%. The Greeks that gained the liberty from the Ottoman Empire looked to Western Europe for their frame of reference as their classical past for inspiration. But the Greeks that remained a part of the Ottoman Empire looked to Byzantium as their reference. Constantinople represented the center of the social and religious world. Many Greeks were rich and influential in the Ottoman Empire. Either rich or poor, they believed in their cultural preeminence. The Sublime Porte had given them a decree of group governing, and they had lived in a relative harmony for over 400 years with the Ottomans, as well as with Armenians and other minorities in Anatolia. Certain areas in Asia Minor, such as the Ionian coast, were wealthy from agriculture and trade. The refugees of the Ionian coast settled on the island of Chios, or Mytilene. Cities such as Smyrna and Constantinople were major cosmopolitan centers. Smyrna was the primary port of the Eastern Mediterranean, where a lot of Easterners and Europeans coexisted. Once the refugees recovered from their most desperate situation, they were disappointed with the lack of sophistication of small provincial towns, such as the city of Chios and even Athens and Thessaloniki. Mainland Greece had been impoverished by years of warfare. The Balkan Wars, 1912-1913, World War I, which Greece entered in 1917, as well as the Greco-Ottoman War in 1919-1922, left her more impoverished than ever. The refugees found the mainland Greeks unsophisticated and felt that they were more cultured, as they saw themselves as the successors to the rich traditions of Byzantium, while the native Greeks distrusted the newly arrived population and treated it badly. That was in the beginning. They felt that they were taking away their jobs, and the fact that the government was giving them agricultural land was an additional reason for bitterness. My conclusion. The Asia Minor refugees were forced to abandon their homeland. They lost their paradise. Many of them, even today, talk with nostalgia about their ancestral homes, but nothing can alter their situation. And today, we have to admit that ethnic groups can coexist with each other, but most of the time, it is governments that make their coexistence impossible. The exchange officially ended in 1921. Thank you.